You do not belong in first class. People like you should sit in the back. The words snapped through the cabin like a whip. A blonde woman in oversized sunglasses did not even lower her voice. Her statement was not whispered to Marcus Carter alone. It was delivered loudly enough for every passenger within 10 rows to hear. Heads turned. A man in a hoodie, holding a boarding pass in his steady hand, stood in the aisle, frozen. He was not shocked. He had heard variations of that sentence before. But around him, the air shifted. Phones lifted, whispers spread, and an uneasy silence settled into the luxury seats. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we are glad you are here. Now, back to Marcus Carter. Marcus remained still, his presence calm against the rising tide of judgment. He wore no watch, no tailored suit, only dark jeans and a plain gray hoodie. He could have been anyone. That was the point. His ticket was valid. His seat was assigned. Yet the woman's words clung to the air like smoke. A flight attendant hurried over, her tone clipped. "Sir, I will need to verify your pass. We have had issues with people sneaking into premium cabins." She snatched the slip from his hand, barely glancing at the green stamp that proved he belonged. The camera lenses of fellow travelers glimmered in the cabin light. A younger woman, 3 rows back, whispered to her seatmate, "That is discrimination." A businessman in a pressed suit smirked, "Not in those clothes. No way." The tension was not about policy. It was about perception. Marcus did not argue. He only said, low and clear, "Run my name." His tone carried the weight of quiet authority. But the flight attendant's smirk widened. She tore the boarding pass straight down the middle. Gasps echoed through the rows. The paper fell in halves, fluttering to the floor like discarded truth. The insult was not just procedural, it was personal. A deliberate act to erase his place in this cabin. Marcus did not flinch. His stillness was its own storm. Behind him, a trainee flight attendant hesitated, eyes wide, her phone recording audio in her pocket. She knew the scan had been valid. She had seen the green light herself. Yet she stood frozen, watching hierarchy swallow truth. A couple in tailored clothes slid effortlessly into the seat that bore his number. They raised their glasses as if the matter had been resolved. Around them, whispers turned to murmurs. Phones tilted higher. The injustice was no longer private. It was public. Marcus inhaled slowly. He had lived this scene before. At 25, it was a hotel lobby. At 32, it was a bank counter. Always the same undertone. You do not belong. Now, in the narrow aisle of first class, it repeated again. But this time, the ending would not echo the past. The silence after the ripped ticket was not empty. It was loaded. Every passenger could feel it. Something larger was about to unfold. Marcus Carter did not move. The torn boarding pass lay at his feet like evidence, but his stillness carried more weight than any argument. The cabin felt smaller, the air tighter, as if the words, "You do not belong," had squeezed the oxygen from the room. Passengers shifted uneasily. Some leaned into the aisle to see better. Others whispered, their voices carrying judgment and disbelief. The flight attendant folded her arms, her jaw stiff. "Sir, you will need to step aside while we sort this out." Her tone carried more contempt than procedure. To her left, the blonde woman who had first spoken leaned back in her leather seat as if she had already won. Her shopping bag rested at her feet, a designer label facing outward like a badge of status. She adjusted her sunglasses and muttered, "People like him always think they can sneak into places they do not deserve." Across the aisle, a man in a navy business suit chuckled. "I give it 5 minutes before security drags him out." His seatmate laughed with him, shaking his head. "Look at the clothes, man. First class is not a hoodie and jeans." The remarks spread like sparks. Each word was small, but together they built a fire meant to burn Marcus down. Marcus inhaled slowly, controlled, the way he had taught himself to do decades earlier when slammed doors and suspicious glances were part of every step forward. He said only one sentence, his voice calm, steady, "Run my name." The flight attendant rolled her eyes. "Enough games, you are not verified." She turned sharply to the front, raising her hand toward the cockpit. Within seconds, the captain emerged, tall, uniform pressed sharp, his voice already firm. "Sir, comply or you will be removed. We have VIP guests waiting for this seat." His words fell with the weight of authority, but the meaning behind them was clear. You do not belong here. In row 4, a young woman pressed record on her phone. Her hand trembled, but her whisper to her friend was steady. "This is discrimination. He showed a valid ticket. I saw it." Her companion, an older man with silver hair, glanced at her screen. "Keep filming. People need to see this." Huh. Near the galley, a trainee flight attendant named Mia froze in place. Her eyes darted from Marcus to her senior colleagues. She had scanned his pass herself. She remembered the green light, the confirmation beep, the system acknowledging his seat. She wanted to speak, but fear wrapped around her throat. Protocol told her to stay silent. Conscience told her the opposite. The blonde woman's voice rose again, slicing the air. "Captain, why are we even entertaining this? He does not belong in this cabin. Put him where he belongs." Several passengers nodded. A few shook their heads. The divide was visible, audible. Marcus lifted his chin, his face calm against the storm of voices. He did not shout. He did not plead. He simply remained, anchored in the aisle, as if the floor itself recognized his right to stand there. The captain signaled to the flight attendant beside him. "Call ground security before we taxi. We will not delay this flight for a fraud." The attendant reached for the phone, her lips already forming the word fraud again. That word carried through the cabin. It stung like a slap, heavy with history. A young mother clutched her daughter closer. An older man shook his head. A teenager whispered, "He did nothing wrong." But the official voices drowned them out. Mia's hands clenched into fists at her side. She could not erase what she had seen. The valid scan, the green light, the truth. Her silence was breaking. The cabin was no longer a space of quiet comfort. It had become a courtroom. And Marcus Carter, still standing, was both the accused and the judge, waiting to render his own verdict. The phone at the flight attendant's station clicked loudly as she spoke into it, her words sharp and rehearsed. "We have a fraudulent passenger in first class, requesting immediate security presence." She looked over at Marcus Carter while speaking, her eyes cold, her tone dripping with disdain. Every syllable was a public indictment. Gasps rippled through the cabin. A father in a checkered shirt holding his toddler whispered, "Fraud. He just showed his ticket." The young woman filming from row 4 muttered, "This is wrong. Everyone can see it." Her phone trembled in her hands, the red light of the camera glaring like a beacon in the dimmed cabin. The blonde woman leaned toward the business couple who had taken Marcus's seat. "Do not worry," she said loudly enough for others to hear. "This will be over soon. People like him always try to take advantage of the system." She sipped from her champagne glass, her confidence resting on the assumption that no one would challenge her. Marcus did not react. He stood rooted, his face unreadable, his breathing steady. His silence was not weakness. It was pressure, building, and waiting. He lifted his phone and spoke quietly, every word deliberate. "Rachel, log this. Mark the time. Note the language they used." On the other end, his assistant's voice came through, clear, calm, efficient. "Logged at 6:18 p.m. Language recorded. Protocol standing by." The captain stiffened at the sound of the name Rachel. "Sir, I am warning you. Put away your phone. You do not have the right to record our crew." Marcus lowered his hand, but he did not comply in spirit. His voice remained even. "I do not need a recording. I have witnesses." From the corner, Mia, the trainee flight attendant, shifted her weight nervously. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her heart pounded. She had seen the scan. She knew the truth. She looked at Marcus, then at the captain, and then back at the glowing screen of her work tablet. The name was gone. Deleted. The system had been altered. The businessman in the navy suit leaned forward with a mocking grin. "Why waste time? Just drag him out. He does not look like anyone who belongs here." The woman beside him laughed, shaking her head. "He probably printed that pass at home." Their voices carried, feeding the bias already hanging thick in the air. Marcus turned slowly to face them, his expression calm but cutting. "You measure belonging by fabric and shoes. I measure it by truth." His voice was quiet, but it cut sharper than any shout. The young woman filming whispered to her friend, "He has not raised his voice once." Her friend nodded. "That is real control. That is power." The captain waved his hand impatiently. "Enough of this theater. Security will handle it." But he looked uneasy, as though he could feel control slipping through his grasp. The murmurs in the cabin were no longer just whispers. They were protests, soft but growing. A teenager in row 6 spoke up, his voice carrying across the quiet. "He paid for that seat. You saw it. Why are you acting like he does not exist? The words sparked something. Other passengers shifted, their faces tightening, their eyes narrowing not at Marcus, but at the crew. Mia's chest rose and fell quickly. She stepped forward just one pace, her voice cracking but clear. His boarding pass scanned green. I saw it. I double-checked. The flight attendant spun around, her face flushing. Stay out of this, trainee. But the damage was done. The words had left Mia's mouth, and the cabin had heard them. A line had been crossed. Marcus met Mia's eyes briefly. His expression softened for only a moment, then returned to steel. Thank you, he said, quiet but strong. The silence that followed was no longer silence. It was expectation. The cabin was waiting, watching, bracing for what came next. And Marcus Carter, still calm, still steady, stood in the center of it all as if he had been here many times before. Because he had. The captain's jaw tightened. His voice dropped into a deeper register, the kind reserved for closing arguments and final warnings. Sir, you are disrupting this flight. If you do not vacate the seat immediately, I will personally order your removal. His eyes scanned the cabin as if daring anyone to disagree. The blonde woman smirked, tapping her manicured nails against the armrest. Finally, handle it. People like him always think rules do not apply. Her words rang out like a gavel, sharp and certain. A few passengers nodded uneasily. Others shifted in discomfort. The air in first class had become a trial by perception, not policy. Marcus Carter did not flinch. He turned his gaze toward the captain, unshaken. What rule did I break? Show me. His tone was not loud, but it carried across the cabin with unnerving steadiness. Silence answered him. Silence, and the weight of every eye fixed upon him. The flight attendant who had torn his pass stepped forward again. Your documentation is invalid. That is the rule. She gestured toward the shredded ticket on the floor, as if her act of destruction could erase its legitimacy. A young man in a sweatshirt leaned from row 5, voice clear. That is not true. I watched her rip it up. Murmurs rose like a tide. The narrative was slipping. The captain's face hardened. Enough. You are interfering with Federal Aviation Administration protocol. Sit down or you will be detained. His words had the cadence of law, but his eyes betrayed uncertainty. Marcus bent down slowly, retrieving the torn halves of his boarding pass. He held them up for the cabin to see. This was my proof. She destroyed it. His voice remained calm, yet every word struck like iron. The blonde woman laughed lightly, her voice dripping with condescension. So dramatic. If you belonged here, you would not need to prove it. She lifted her champagne again, dismissive. But the spell of her confidence no longer held the room. Near the galley, Mia's hands shook. She stepped forward another pace. I confirmed his scan. I know what I saw. Her voice cracked, but she did not retract it. A ripple moved through the passengers. A mother whispered, "She is telling the truth." A businessman muttered, "Then why are they lying?" The older man with silver hair leaned forward from his aisle seat. Because they think no one will challenge them. His words landed heavy, echoing in the cabin's tense quiet. Marcus turned his head slowly, his eyes sweeping the room. He was not pleading. He was measuring, steady, letting the weight of silence settle again. Then he spoke, voice calm, each syllable deliberate. You called me a fraud without evidence. You tore my pass. You ignored your own system. And now you want me removed for existing. Tell me, Captain, what exactly are you protecting? The captain shifted his stance, his authority wobbling under the weight of the question. He did not answer. He could not. The silence fractured when a teenager raised his phone high. I am recording this. Everyone needs to see. Others followed, lifting their cameras. Screens glowed like a constellation in the dim light of the cabin. The flight attendant hissed, "Put those down, this is confidential." But her voice shook. Control was slipping through her fingers. Marcus remained centered, unbothered, the fragments of his boarding pass still in his hand. He did not raise his voice. He did not move. His stillness filled the cabin more than any command. The air felt charged now, no longer quiet, no longer compliant. Passengers were not just watching, they were bearing witness. And the crew, once so certain, began to realize they were no longer holding the power in this cabin. A crackle of static came through the intercom as the captain pressed the button near the cockpit door. His voice boomed across the cabin, louder than before, an attempt to reclaim dominance. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a disruption in first class. Please remain seated while security is dispatched to resolve the situation. The announcement fell like a hammer, but instead of restoring order, it ignited unrest. Passengers shifted in their seats, whispering, their eyes bouncing between Marcus Carter and the crew. The tension was no longer confined to one row. It had become the atmosphere of the entire cabin. The blonde woman leaned forward, her voice cutting. Good. Finally, some action. This nonsense has gone on long enough. She set her glass down with a sharp click, as if her satisfaction were the final word. A teenager 2 rows back muttered, not quietly enough, "This is wrong." He did not do anything. His mother pulled him closer, but her eyes burned with the same conviction. Marcus Carter stood still, the torn boarding pass resting in his open palm. He let the silence that followed the announcement settle over him like armor. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of patience sharpened by years of repetition. "You do not need more announcements. You need truth. Run my name. That is all I have asked." The flight attendant scoffed, her laugh brittle. "That is not how it works. We follow procedure." Mia, the trainee, could not hold back any longer. She stepped into the aisle, voice shaking but loud enough to carry. "That is not true. His pass scanned valid. I saw it. You all saw me scan it." Her cheeks flushed crimson, but she stood her ground. Gasps rippled. The cabin turned. Passengers stared at her, then back at the senior crew. The silence that followed was heavier than the captain's announcement. The businessman in the navy suit sneered. "She is just a trainee. She does not know protocol." His words carried arrogance, but not conviction. The older man with silver hair leaned forward, his voice low but firm. Sometimes the youngest voice is the only honest one. The crew froze. Authority was slipping, not in a burst, but in steady erosion. Each word spoken by the witnesses chipped away at their certainty. Marcus raised his head slightly, his voice steady. "You see it now. The silence has cracked. The truth is out. You can try to erase a name in your system, but you cannot erase the people who saw it." The blonde woman scoffed loudly, though her tone carried a hint of unease. "This is ridiculous. He is playing all of you." The young woman still filming spoke up, her voice trembling with outrage. "No, we are watching you play yourselves." Phones were raised higher. Screens glowed brighter. The evidence was no longer in the hands of the crew. It was in the hands of the passengers. The captain's posture stiffened, his authority clinging to formality. "If you do not comply, sir, we will forcibly remove you." But even as he said it, his voice lacked the steel it had carried minutes earlier. Marcus Carter did not raise his voice. He did not move. His stillness was louder than any threat. "Touch me, and you will prove everything they are recording." The words hung in the air, undeniable, immovable. The crew stared, the passengers waited, and the weight of truth pressed harder with every second that passed. GPT Black CEO Moy said, the cabin had grown heavier, as if every breath carried the weight of judgment. Passengers sat upright, their eyes locked on the standoff, unfolding only a few feet away. Phones hovered in the air like tiny searchlights, catching every twitch, every word. The captain's hand tightened around his radio. "Ground security will meet us before departure. Until then, this passenger will remain detained." His tone was sharp, but beneath it was the tremor of a man who knew control was slipping. The flight attendant beside him crossed her arms. "You heard the captain. Sit down or leave. Either way, you are done here." Her words cracked like a whip meant to reassert dominance. Marcus Carter did not sit. He remained still, tall, steady. His silence was no longer emptiness. It was defiant. Then the blonde woman rose from her seat, adjusting her sunglasses with a smug grin. "I told you from the start," she declared, her voice dripping with triumph. "People like him should never be in first class. This is what happens when you let anyone through the gate." Her words were not a whisper. They were delivered for the entire cabin, laced with venom. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, murmurs, a few passengers shaking their heads in disbelief. A mother clutched her child tighter. A young man muttered, "She really said that out loud." The older man with silver hair leaned forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "Do you hear yourselves? This is not security, this is bigotry." His tone was not raised, but it carried authority, the kind born from decades of seeing too much. Mia's voice cracked again as she took another step into the aisle. "His ticket was valid. I scanned it. I double-checked. You cannot erase that." Her hands trembled, but her eyes did not waver. The senior flight attendant spun toward her, face flushed with anger. You will regret speaking out of turn. But Mia did not back down. Not as much as you will regret lying in front of witnesses. The words rippled through the cabin like a spark hitting dry wood. The murmurs grew louder. Passengers began to shift in their seats, not away from Marcus, but closer to his side. A silent alignment. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low and unwavering. You called me a fraud. You tore my pass. You branded me as less than human. And yet I am still here. Ask yourselves why that island. The silence that followed was no longer compliance. It was realization. The balance of power in the cabin had shifted, and everyone knew it. The silence did not last. It cracked under the weight of a single word spoken by the senior flight attendant, her voice rising sharp enough to cut. Fraud. She said it louder this time, as if volume could make a lie true. She jabbed her finger toward Marcus Carter. You are a fraud. You do not belong here. The word detonated in the cabin. A few passengers gasped. Others shook their heads. The blonde woman smirked, her satisfaction renewed. Finally, someone says it straight, she muttered, sipping her champagne like a toast to humiliation. Marcus remained still, his eyes fixed on the flight attendant. He did not blink. He did not move. The torn pieces of his boarding pass were still in his hand, fragile but undeniable. Then the businessman in the navy suit leaned forward, his tone mocking. If you really had money, you would not be dressed like that. People like you play pretend until someone checks the numbers. His laughter rang hollow, but loud enough for others to hear. A teenager 2 rows back shouted, That is not true. He did nothing wrong. His voice cracked with youthful outrage, but it carried. Other passengers stirred, their agreement visible in nods and whispers. The captain raised his hand for silence, his patience fraying. This ends now. Security will be here any minute. Until then, remain calm. But his voice no longer carried command. It carried fear. Marcus slowly raised his head, his voice steady and calm. You called me a fraud. You tore my pass. You erased my name from your system. And still I stand here. Ask yourselves, passengers, why you think I do not belong. Is it policy, or is it perception? His words landed like a stone dropped into water, sending ripples across the cabin. The mother, holding her child, whispered, He is right. A man in a baseball cap muttered, They do not want him here because of how he looks. Mia stepped forward again, her voice stronger now. This is not a fraud case. This is profiling. I scanned that ticket. It was valid. They deleted his name after the fact. Her words were louder than before, her conviction sharper. The cabin erupted in murmurs. Phones tilted higher. The glow of recording screens lit the faces of witnesses who would not stay silent. The flight attendant's face flushed crimson. You are lying, she snapped at Mia. But her voice cracked, betraying her. Marcus turned to Mia, giving the smallest nod. Then he faced the cabin once more. The truth is no longer mine alone. It belongs to every one of you who saw, who heard, who felt the weight of this injustice. And with that, the tide in the cabin shifted. What began as one man accused had become an entire room awakened. The captain's radio crackled again, but his words faltered as he saw the shifting mood of the cabin. What had begun as a simple accusation was unraveling in front of him, and he could feel the authority slipping through his grip. His jaw tightened, but hesitation crept into his voice. Security will resolve this, he said, though the words no longer carried conviction. Marcus Carter moved at last, but not with aggression. He lifted his phone slowly, pressed one button, and brought it to his ear. His tone was calm, measured, every syllable clear. Rachel, escalate protocol. Timestamp this moment. A clear voice answered immediately, audible enough for those close by to hear. Logged and confirmed. Systems are standing by. The blonde woman scoffed, her laughter thin and cruel. What is that supposed to mean? A fake assistant on the phone? Pathetic. She leaned back in her seat, certain that her reality was still the dominant one. But Marcus remained unmoved. You believe silence is weakness, he said quietly, his gaze sweeping the cabin. You believe calm means powerless. That is your mistake. Mia took another step forward, her courage solidifying with each breath. He is telling the truth. His name was there. I saw it before they erased it. Her voice trembled, but her eyes held steady. The senior flight attendant snapped, her control unraveling. Enough. You will lose your job for this. But Mia did not retreat. She raised her chin, her voice clear. Then so be it. I will not lie for you. The passengers erupted in murmurs, louder this time. A mother with her child said, "She is risking her career to tell the truth." An older man muttered, "That should tell you everything you need to know." Marcus's voice cut through the noise, calm but carrying. "Every word spoken here is being logged. Every action is being witnessed. When truth arrives, it does not knock, it enters." The captain's face blanched. He glanced at his crew, then at the cluster of raised phones glowing like a constellation of judgment. The cabin was no longer under his command. It had become a stage, and every passenger was both audience and witness. The blonde woman shook her head, muttering, "You are all being manipulated. This is a show." The young woman, still filming, replied without looking away from her phone. "No, this is evidence." The divide was clear now, carved into the air itself. On one side, the crew clinging to a false narrative. On the other, Marcus, Mia, and an awakening chorus of passengers unwilling to stay silent. And in the center of it all, Marcus Carter stood motionless, his calm presence commanding more power than the uniforms meant to remove him. The battle for truth had shifted, and everyone could feel it. The cabin felt like a courtroom waiting for its verdict. Every seat was filled with witnesses, every phone a glowing recorder of truth. The crew stood rigid, but their confidence had cracked. The word fraud no longer echoed with certainty. It sounded like desperation. Marcus Carter lowered his phone, his calm never breaking. His voice came steady, deliberate. "Since you refuse to verify, I will." He stepped forward into the aisle, his presence filling the space. "My name is Marcus Carter, Chief Executive Officer and a major shareholder of this airline." Gasps swept the cabin. The blonde woman's glass slipped from her hand, clinking against the tray table. The businessman in the navy suit blinked, his smirk vanishing. The captain froze in place, his hand tightening around the radio as if gripping it harder could anchor his authority. Mia's breath caught. She had suspected something, but hearing it spoken aloud shifted the ground beneath her. "He owns this airline," she whispered, her voice trembling with awe. The senior flight attendant shook her head violently. "Impossible. If that were true, he would not be dressed like this. He would not be standing here like some—" She cut herself off, but the poison in her tone was unmistakable. Marcus turned toward her, his voice calm but sharp. "You measure belonging by clothing and appearance. I measure it by equity, by ownership, by truth. Tell me again who does not belong here." The young woman recording whispered to her phone, "He just said he is the owner. This is unreal." Her video captured the cabin, passengers' mouths hanging open, disbelief colliding with recognition. The captain's authority faltered, his face pale. You are claiming to be an executive?" His question carried less doubt than fear. Marcus's gaze held him steady. "I am not claiming. I am confirming. Every passenger here will see that what you called a fraud is in fact ownership. What you tried to erase cannot be erased." The murmurs turned into a swell of voices. "He said he owns the airline. Did you hear that? Unbelievable." Phones tilted higher, capturing every angle. The blonde woman shook her head in disbelief, her voice trembling now. This cannot be real, but the conviction in her tone had vanished. Marcus looked around slowly, meeting the eyes of the passengers. His words landed with deliberate weight. "The problem is not that you did not know who I was. The problem is how you treated me when you thought I was no one." The silence that followed was thunderous. The power had shifted completely, and every person in the cabin knew it. The revelation shattered the cabin's balance. The blonde woman's smug smile collapsed into open shock. She sank back into her seat, her sunglasses slipping down her nose as if even they could not shield her. The businessman in the navy suit swallowed hard, his arrogance evaporating in the charged silence. The senior flight attendant's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no words emerged. She clutched her badge as if it could protect her, but her authority had already disintegrated. The captain, once towering with control, now looked smaller, his uniform no longer a symbol of command, but a reminder of how wrong he had been. Mia stepped fully into the aisle, her voice steady now. "I told you. His name was real. His ticket was valid. You erased it because you did not want to believe what you saw." Her words hit like stones, undeniable and clear. Passengers erupted in murmurs, louder this time. A mother whispered, "They treated him like nothing, in an airline he owns." A young man shook his head. "This is history repeating itself. Different uniforms, same prejudice." Phones tilted higher. Some passengers stood just enough to capture the faces of the crew, their fear now as visible as their earlier arrogance. Marcus Carter remained calm, the center of gravity in the storm. His voice was even unshaken. "You tore my pass. You called me a fraud. You erased my name. And yet, you cannot erase who I am." The weight of his words pressed through the cabin. The crew stood paralyzed. Passengers stared, some nodding, some whispering, all of them knowing that a line had been crossed that could never be hidden. The power dynamic had inverted. The ones who sought to humiliate were now humiliated, and Marcus Carter, without raising his voice, had turned the entire cabin into witnesses of their downfall. The senior flight attendant reached for the intercom again, but her hand trembled. Before she could speak, Marcus Carter lifted his phone once more. His tone was calm, but final. "Rachel, execute termination protocol, effective immediately." The reply came crisp, carrying through the quiet cabin. "Confirmed. Crew access revoked. Incident logged for legal review." At that very moment, the senior flight attendant's badge lit red, the small screen flashing, "Access denied." She tapped it again and again, her panic visible to every watching eye. The captain checked his own credentials against the cockpit door. The lock buzzed red, shutting him out of his own command. His shoulders sagged, his authority gone in an instant. Gasps filled the cabin. Passengers whispered to one another, phones recording every flicker of shock. A young woman muttered, "He just locked them out. Right here, right now." A teenager shouted, "That is justice." The blonde woman stared, her earlier smugness gone. He really is who he says he island." Her words cracked, the last of her certainty breaking apart. Mia's eyes widened, her voice rising with awe. He did not just defend himself. He ended their power in front of all of us. The senior flight attendant's face crumbled, her earlier arrogance dissolving into fear. She stammered, "You cannot do this. You cannot—" Marcus interrupted, his words cutting like steel. "I already did." The cabin erupted. Some passengers applauded, others shouted in approval, while every phone stayed raised, capturing the moment authority collapsed and justice stood unshaken in its place. The humiliation had shifted. The crew who tried to erase him now stood erased themselves. The cabin was no longer divided. Every passenger had witnessed the reversal, and the weight of the truth pressed down on the air like a storm finally breaking. Phones stayed raised, eyes wide, the silence charged with disbelief and awe. Marcus Carter lowered his phone, his calm unwavering. He looked slowly across the cabin, not at the crew who trembled in their uniforms, but at the passengers who had seen everything. His voice carried even without volume. "The problem was never that you did not know who I was. The problem was how you treated me when you thought I was no one." The words landed like a verdict. A mother with her daughter began to clap, firm and deliberate. The sound spread, hands striking together row by row, until the entire cabin roared with applause. A few passengers stood, raising their phones higher, determined that the world outside this plane would see what had happened inside. Mia, still standing in the aisle, wiped her eyes. "You showed us what real power looks like," she said softly. "Not loud, not cruel, just undeniable." The captain, stripped of authority, stood pale and silent. The senior flight attendant lowered her gaze, her badge still flashing red. The blonde woman stared out the window, her earlier arrogance crumbling into shame she could not disguise. Marcus did not gloat. He did not shout. He spoke one final sentence, steady as stone. "I do not need your approval. I carry my own." The applause swelled again, louder, a wave of sound that filled the cabin with the force of vindication. Phones kept recording, but the truth no longer needed them. Justice had already been delivered. Marcus Carter remained still, anchored in dignity, while the very people who tried to erase him had become the evidence of their own downfall. And with that, the flight and the story belonged not to the crew, but to the man they underestimated.